We do have breaking news now. The Trump administration has just revoked Harvard University's ability to enroll any international students.
This marks a sharp escalation in the ongoing battle between the White House and the nation's oldest university.
Trump's war on Harvard is heating up, and things just took another big turn. We're going to break down the latest updates in the Trump administration's battle with Harvard, plus the King of England's cringe land acknowledgement, and a controversy over the 10 Commandments down in Texas. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. Up first, we've got to talk about the latest updates in the long-running feud at this point between the Trump administration and Harvard, the much maligned and often for good reason, very left-wing elite university in my home state of Massachusetts that's come under fire for all sorts of things, from its, I think, openly discriminatory affirmative action policies to its handling of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel protests on its campus. All this and so many other things have really put a bullseye on its back, and now that it's in this long legal feud with the Trump administration taking action against it, that just had a big update concerning international students at Harvard. Take a listen to this summary of what happened from CNN.
We do have breaking news now. The Trump administration has just revoked Harvard University's ability to enroll any international students. The existing international students there have to transfer out, and no new ones can be accepted in.
This marks a sharp escalation in the ongoing battle between the White House and the nation's oldest university. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is at the White House. Jeff, tell us what's happening here.
Well, Brianna and Boris, there has been an ongoing fight between the White House and Harvard University over the curriculum, over the federal funding, and now over international students. As you said, this is a dramatic escalation. We are learning this announcement from the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Kristi Noem making the announcement this afternoon, essentially giving a warning to Harvard that they are no longer allowed to admit international students. So she writes this in part: they have lost their student and exchange visitor program certification as a result of their failure to adhere to the law, she says. Let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country. So let's break that down a touch. She's accusing them, Harvard University of failing to adhere to the law. Of course, there were some rules essentially that were put out as a strings, if you will, on federal funding for what type of a curriculum universities could use, what type of DEI programs they couldn't have. Of course, this all stems from protests on college campuses. Harvard University is pushing back very hard at this. Just a statement coming out just a few moments ago. Harvard is saying that they will challenge this legally as well, and they go on to say this: the government's action is unlawful, Harvard says. We are fully committed to maintaining Harvard's ability to host international students and scholars who hail from more than 140 countries and enrich the university and this nation immeasurably. So how many students are we talking about here? Well, in this academic year alone, almost 30% of Harvard's student body were made up of international students, some 6,793 according to this year's academic record. So the government is saying that these students must transfer. We are told that they are likely to be able to transfer to another U.S. institution, not necessarily return to their home countries. But of course, this will be one of the many actions of this administration that will be challenged legally.
So this is a really big deal. I mean, thousands of students who have dreamed and worked their whole lives to get into Harvard and go to Harvard and get into the programs of their dreams are now having their lives turned upside down and are being forced to transfer to another school. That is, I think, a big deal, and really something you would only want to see invoked or done in the most severe of circumstances. So I really want to get into the Trump administration's reasoning here, and then we can explore the different things that they're citing as justification and talk about them each in turn. Secretary Kristi Noem posted on X, "This administration is holding Harvard accountable for fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party on its campus. Let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country." So this move is being criticized by civil liberties watchdogs like the Nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, where, disclaimer, I do a little bit of freelance work, the nation's premier civil liberties and free speech organization. They said this in a statement: "The Department of Homeland Security's decision to escalate its assault against Harvard University by revoking its ability to enroll international students is retaliatory and unlawful. Secretary Noem's letter warns that the Trump administration seeks to, quote, root out the evils of anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism in society and campuses. But little is more un-American than a federal bureaucrat demanding that a private university demonstrate its ideological fealty to the government under pain of punishment." There's also more to come where they talk about the specific handling of the campus protests, and the federal government is requesting surveillance footage and other stuff that we'll get into in a moment. But first, just on this crucial point here, I think the Trump administration is muddying the waters here. If they were simply going after Harvard for breaking laws about anti-discrimination protections, about DEI, things that are illegal, they would have much stronger footing, in my view, although they would still have to go through a particular process that they are kind of circumventing here. I think they would be on much stronger territory. But when they start saying things like, we're going to punish you and take away your ability to host international students because of your anti-American and anti-Semitic beliefs, I mean, that becomes a form of speech policing, of thought policing that the federal government has no right to do on any college campus, let alone a private campus, although, of course, they heavily benefit from federal money, so the water's a little murky there as well. It's not illegal to hold anti-American beliefs. Also, what constitutes an anti-American belief is pretty subjective, and I personally don't want the government in power ever deciding that, because newsflash, how they decide it is going to skew very much in favor of their own administration. In the same way, anti-Semitism in its true form is horrible, and I condemn it unreservedly, but it's also subjective. What constitutes anti-Semitism? And some people conflate things as anti-Semitism that are really just anti-Israel, or aren't anti-Semitic in fact, or are even being done by Jewish people themselves. So the same way I wouldn't want the government targeting universities and punishing them for allowing transphobia because they have J.K. Rowling speak on campus, or homophobia because they question different elements of LGBTQ. Like, I really am not comfortable with the federal government engaging in any kind of speech or bigotry policing. The entire thing has kind of a safe space aspect to it anyway, that we don't actually need the federal government to protect students from ideas or beliefs that are objectionable or hurt their feelings. Now, violence and law breaking is a different story, and some of that has definitely occurred on college campuses, including Harvard, but they're muddying the waters by conflating the two things in a way that I really think is harmful. I also think there's something kind of condescending to some of these students about the message here that you need to switch schools because Harvard is too anti-Semitic for you. But look, data show that Harvard has 93 students enrolled from Israel, and it's probably safe to assume that many of them are Jewish. If Harvard is this anti-Semitic horrible place, and I personally believe that there's probably parts of it that are, but then parts of it that really aren't at all, like any massive institution, then they can transfer. They can choose to leave if they're uncomfortable with it. And I would think that's horrible that they would have to do so. But if they're not unhappy at Harvard, if they like their program, if they're content with the way things are going, the idea that the government would come in and say, no, you have to leave for your own good to protect you from the anti-Semitism that you're not experiencing according to you strikes me as kind of absurd. Now, we're also going to get into the kind of surveillance state aspect of this dispute after this. Have you ever thought about being a YouTuber? It's a daunting prospect, but it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done professionally. Key to the success of any great YouTube channel is, of course, the content, but also great thumbnails. And thanks to today's sponsor, Opus Clip, you no longer need to hire an expensive thumbnail designer to get started. Their new feature, Opus Clip Thumbnail, is a one-click AI thumbnail generator. Users simply paste in an unlisted or public video link, and they extract key information to automatically generate personalized, high-performing thumbnails. This transforms a process that can take hours or even days into one that takes minutes and is completely free. For example, I put in a clip from one of my podcasts from a few weeks ago where I discussed the arson attack on Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and implore people to set politics aside and condemn the violence. It came up with this really cool thumbnail just minutes later. Head to the link on screen and in the description to get started and check out this cool new feature from OpusClip and all their other services that make getting started in content creation easier than ever before. Check it out now, you'll be glad you did. So the other aspect of this dispute between the Trump administration and Harvard is the Trump White House, or the federal government, demanding that Harvard turn over a bunch of surveillance footage and personal data about students involved in different protests. Here's what Fire had to say about that. The department's demand that Harvard produce audio and video footage of all protest activity involving international students over the last 5 years is gravely alarming. This is a sweeping fishing expedition that reaches protected expression and must be flatly rejected. The department is already arresting and seeking to deport students for engaging in protected political activity it disfavors. Were Harvard to capitulate to Secretary Noem's unlawful demands, more students could face such consequences. The administration's demand for a surveillance state at Harvard is anathema to American freedom. I agree with this. I don't think they have the right to demand that Harvard turn over thousands of hours of footage of protests so that they can then comb through them all to go after people, especially because a lot of the people involved in those protests are American citizens engaging in their First Amendment rights. I mean, if there's a specific crime that they're investigating, they can get a subpoena for footage of that day and that event. But the idea that they're going to demand Harvard at the threat of existential punishments like banning their ability to enroll international students into perpetuity, going to force you to turn over all your footage and everything and basically make you into a de facto surveillance arm of the government, I think is a huge overreach, and that Harvard should not have to comply with that. There's also some strange confusion from the Trump administration about why they need some of this data. So, for example, Donald Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social, "Why isn't Harvard saying that almost 31% of their students are from foreign lands, and yet those countries, some not at all friendly to the United States, pay nothing toward their students' education, nor do they ever intend to? Nobody told us that." So the number that I saw doing research was 27%, not 31, but sure. And I'm a little confused by this statement because, of course, the countries aren't paying anything to Harvard, but the students are. They're paying exorbitant tuition rates to come here. In fact, it's an export, right? We are selling education to citizens of other countries. And in Trump's kind of trade war approach, he wants more exports and fewer imports. But here he is upset about a very prominent export. Trump continues, "We want to know who these foreign students are. A reasonable request since we give Harvard billions of dollars, but Harvard isn't exactly forthcoming. We want those names and countries." So this is strange because the federal government already has the names and countries and a heck of a lot more information about every international student at Harvard. They all have to apply for and receive student visas, which is an extensive process that entails turning all that information over to the Fed. So what does the president mean here? That Harvard won't tell them the names and identities and backgrounds of their international students? You already know all of that. Now, please don't interpret any of this as some kind of apology for Harvard, in that I think a lot of its behavior and its policies are illegal, yes, in terms of discriminating against Asians and whites, and I think they should have been punished through the proper process of instigating a civil rights investigation through the Department of Justice, or the Department of Education, and then having a court ruling forcing them to change their policies and potentially pay massive fines. I think that they spew a lot of ideas I strongly disagree with, and I think they definitely botched and mishandled a lot of the protests that at times absolutely did veer into anti-Semitism in the last couple of years since October 7th. But call me crazy. I still think Harvard does a lot of good work and a lot of good for this country, especially in the hard sciences and in biomedicine and in research. And I don't really think that the full-scale destruction of Harvard, which is what the Trump administration is essentially promoting when they say rip them of all the federal funding, even the stuff for cancer research and the like, rip them of their tax-exempt status, ban them from having international students. At some point, you're basically just going to destroy Harvard, which, despite its many flaws, is kind of a crown jewel of American higher education. And I thought the MAGA attitude was supposed to be about wanting to be the best of the best, wanting to say that in America, we have the world's best and most prestigious universities like Harvard, not to destroy them in a fit of essentially revenge. That's the message I'm getting here from this. We don't like your beliefs and your ideas, and we're going to ruin you because you won't comply with our extensive demands. Something tells me that if the Obama administration or the Biden administration was doing this to Hillsdale or Liberty or another right-leaning university, people on the right, many Trump voters, would have a huge problem with it, just on a matter of principle. And while I think there's very valid criticisms and different steps that can and should be taken against Harvard for some of the stuff it's done, I can't get on board with this total destruction, especially when it upends thousands of people's lives, like these international students, many of whom have done absolutely nothing wrong. Even some Trump supporters are not on board with how far Trump is taking things against Harvard. Here is MAGA-supporting businessman Kevin O'Leary, who is also an instructor at Harvard, talking about this issue.
The Trump administration has moved to block Harvard's student visa program, Harvard suing. Okay, I got all that. You're an executive fellow there. What do you make of this strong move against Harvard?
It's so clear as to what has to happen. The president of Harvard has to call the president of the United States, get behind closed doors, and work out a deal. But let me assure you something about these international students. I teach them. These are the smartest students in the world. Harvard is the oldest educational institution. These students are extraordinary individuals, and they don't hate America. They want to come here and stay in America, and they want to figure out a way that they can start a business in America, and we want them. We want them here. I want to invest in them. I've already invested in 2 of them. These are the brightest and the best from around the world, and they're coming for the American dream. Now, Harvard has to talk to the president to president. Now, This has to get worked out. When I go back there to teach in the fall, I want the best and brightest, because I, along with millions of other investors, want them to stay in America. Why don't we vet them first, check their backgrounds, clear them, and tell them, you graduate Harvard, you're an engineer or whatever, you stay here and you start a business here, and you'll get funded here, and you'll create jobs here, because that's why you came here in the first place. These people do not hate America.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Cheer up, Mr. Wonderful. Cheer up. It's over. We're done.
Wait, Howard. I mean, Stuart.
Stuart. Oh, there you go. A Harvard booster.
I agree with him. We clearly need some kind of resolution to this ongoing feud, but the Trump administration is going too far. Yes, we should stop Harvard from illegally discriminating against people or pushing DEI programs that violate basic civil rights laws, but we can do that without ruining thousands of people's lives who weren't involved in any of that, or making unreasonable demands, or stretching the law past its breaking point in, frankly, some kind of revenge campaign. That's my take on all this, but what do you think? Do let me know in the comments. Please do make sure subscribed if you aren't yet, and do hit that like button while you're at it. Remember, guys, you can send me voice notes at the link in the description for my Friday voicemail episodes, where I hear out your woke horror stories and your personal situations and give you my honest feedback and advice. So if you want to send one of those, definitely do at the link in the description. Plus, check out the merch line, subscribe to my second channel for bonus content. And now, let's check in with the King of England, who just did something that I think, honestly, this is a world record of cringe.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and the Shinabeg people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation, while continuing to deepen my own understanding. It is my great hope that in each of your communities, and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed.
So I have to repeat my basic call. Give it back or shut the fuck up, people. I am so sick of this pompous virtue signaling. Here you have King Charles visiting Canada and engaging in one of these performative land acknowledgements where you talk about who used to own the land, but do absolutely nothing to give it back or make amends or help Native or Indigenous people in any way. You just virtue signal that you're aware of the past oppression of people, but intend to do absolutely nothing about it. Like, I can't be the only one who finds that absolutely maddening and kind of the peak of cringe identity politics. And it's just deeply ironic coming from the head of the UK royal family. And not to get into that whole like monarchism debate. Obviously, I'm an American. You can guess where I stand on all that. But to be throwing shade at like invaders or colonialism or occupying and taking people's land when you are literally the head of the British royal family is kind of diabolical, unless you are prepared to make some pretty specific reparations and amends to a lot of the countries and people that y'all did exactly that too. I understand it wasn't King Charles himself. He's not really responsible for it. But when you're representing an institution and then you're making these kinds of comments, I mean, it is hilarious. I mean, somebody was asking Grok about this. King Charles himself is likely descended from Norman invaders. Again, I don't place a whole lot of meaning on that, but it's just funny context. Now, maybe he was just doing what they do in Canada. When in Canada, you must be woke and cringe to go along with them or something. I don't know. But I find this entire practice of land acknowledgements maddening, cringeworthy, and honestly, so do a lot of Native and Indigenous people. Some of them have been very outspoken about how much they hate this practice, how just kind of meaningless and trite and how full of virtue signaling it is. I really hope that in 2025 we were beyond this, but unfortunately, that does not appear to be the case. Okay, guys, now let's head down to Texas and catch up on the latest controversy involving a new law that would require schools, public schools, to display the 10 Commandments, the Christian tenets of their faith, as part of classroom displays. Here's some coverage from News Nation.
Let's take you to Texas now. Lawmakers there just approved a bill requiring every public school classroom to display the 10 Commandments. And while supporters call it a return to moral roots, critics say a court fight is a brewing. Texas is one of a dozen states currently considering this mandate. Lawmakers in 3 states, you got Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, they voted down similar bills. Arkansas is the only state in the country to sign such a bill into law this year.
Well, Senate Bill 10 now heads back to the Senate for approval after an amendment was actually added just yesterday. It's likely then to go to Governor Greg Abbott's desk, who is likely to sign it. But you said that, a myriad of controversy. Critics are like, hey, what about separation of church and state? So here's what the law would require. Every public school classroom in Texas to display a 16 by 20 inch copy of the 10 Commandments using the specific version included in the bill. There's no opt-out option for districts and no penalties listed for noncompliance, but schools must accept donated posters or buy them outright. If approved and signed by the governor, the bill takes effect in the 2025-2026 school year, which is coming up. It's sooner than you think. The school year is over, so September, just a few months away, Marky.
So I'm not a fan of this. I do think this is kind of religious overreach. The 10 Commandments, some of them are fairly uncontroversial, thou shalt not kill, but some of them are explicitly religious and Christian in nature, like keeping the Sabbath holy and not engaging in idolatry and other things. So I don't think that just one version of religion should be enshrined in a public classroom as like some sort of guiding principle. I'm okay with things like the Bible or the 10 Commandments being taught or discussed as a matter of history because they're obviously of enormous historical and civic import, but they shouldn't be promoted without other options and arguments and religions being represented as well. And it definitely shouldn't be mandatory in all cases. You must display this. To me, that does run afoul of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution and isn't appropriate in public schools. But the really funny aspect of this story to me was pointed out by a Democratic lawmaker who is opposed to this in Texas, that in passing this legislation, they violated the 10 Commandments. Let's take a listen to this clip.
What is the 4th commandment? Keep the Sabbath.
Part of keeping the Sabbath holy is not working on the Sabbath.
That is, yeah.
What day is the Jewish Sabbath?
It is on Saturday.
And what day is it today?
It is Saturday. Here we are.
The Christian Sabbath is what day?
Sunday, in honor of the day that Jesus rose from the dead.
And we're scheduled to give this bill a final vote on what day of the week?
It's ironic, isn't it?
Would you be willing to postpone your bill so that we're not breaking the Ten Commandments by working on the Jewish or Christian Sabbath?
I love that you said that, because
you're saying that you'd rather tell people to follow the Ten Commandments than follow it yourself?
I would have rather have had this bill passed the other day when it was time.
We as a legislature are about to force every teacher in the state to post the Ten Commandments in their classrooms.
If they are donated.
Do members of the Texas legislature follow the Ten Commandments?
So again, this bill is about honoring our historical, educational, and judicial heritage with the displaying of the Ten Commandments. You know, it is incumbent on all of us to follow God's law.
So I have to be honest, I think his point was made effectively. If you are going to force every teacher in your state to display and teach the Ten Commandments, you should probably not openly violate them while passing the law enacting that requirement. Hot take, but you probably shouldn't do that. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. But I just found this funny. I do think it's unfortunately part of a broader trend away from kind of classical liberal ideas of things like the separation of church and state, which is a valid and important civic principle to me. And maybe it's emerging out of the hostility towards Christianity we saw culturally and legally, like trying to force the cake baker to bake the cake. But to me, it's also wrong to force the atheist teacher to teach the Ten Commandments to students in public schools who many of whom aren't Christian and their parents might strongly object to it. A lot of our politics these days does come down to pendulum swings, going one way and then swinging back too far in the opposite direction. And maybe this is a part of that, but it's definitely something I'm concerned to see playing out in states across the country, not just Texas. What do you think? Do you support forcing teachers to teach the Ten Commandments? Let me know in the comments. And regardless, please do make sure to subscribe if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go. Send in voice notes, check out the merch, subscribe to my second channel, yada, yada, yada. Thank you to Opus Clip for sponsoring today's episode, and we'll talk again real soon.